Hi guys, Michael Abayomi here. So I just got done watching episode 5 of season 2 of House of the Dragon, titled Regents. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about the episode, which is going to be filled with full spoilers. So consider this a spoiler warning if you haven't watched the episode and you don't want to know what happens beforehand. So the episode opens at Driftmark, where we see Lord Corlys, who is clearly devastated by the death of his wife, Rhaenys. And after that big climactic moment from the last episode, it only makes sense for them to start this episode by addressing that huge loss, because this was a huge loss for Team Black. And we can even see Rhaenyra also mourning in her own way in Dragonstone. And in a way, the episode as a whole examines the repercussions of this particular loss, both for Team Green and Team Black. And speaking of Team Green, we then have Criston Cole and his forces paraded ahead of Meleys through the streets of King's Landing. But it doesn't garner the kind of response that he was expecting, as the people more or less see the whole thing as a bad omen. Because you have to remember that never in the history of King's Landing have they had dragon on dragon fights. So it was quite the rude awakening for the people to see these dragons, this beast that they've held up to godlike status, being revealed to be mortal creatures. So this was a big revelation for the people of King's Landing, and in a way it's going to signal a change in their perception of the members of House Targaryen. And we finally get some light shed on the fate of the king, Aegon, who, as it turns out, was badly burnt and just at the precipice between life and death. So we have the Maesters immediately hopping to work and trying to patch him up as best as they could, and it was so bad that even his skin, like his armor, his Valyrian steel armor, had pretty much welded into his skin, and they had to painstakingly peel it off. So it's clear that he's going to be out of commission for a while, and as a repercussion of this, we now have a council meeting where a vote is taken to determine who is going to act as regent in his place. And we have Alicent's reluctance to allow Aemond ascend to that position, and she puts forward the notion of her taking the position herself. But she is vastly outnumbered, as it is clear that all the other members of the council wanted Aemond. So Aemond becomes the regent, and he immediately springs to action, asking them to cut down all the rat catchers that were still hanging off the walls of the city. And we later see Alicent confronting Criston Cole, asking why he didn't have her back, and he reveals that he was actually still reeling from the battle, suffering through the trauma and the realization that his role as a soldier is minimized in the presence of dragons. And since the war, the Dance of Dragons, is pretty much a war between dragon riders, he felt it was only right for their side to be led by Dragon Rider himself. Over at the Riverlands, we finally get Daemon making good on his promise to rally troops for Team Black, and we see him confronting the members of House Bracken, trying to get them to drop their feud with House Blackwood and come over to their side. But as Daemon quickly finds out, the ongoing feud runs even stronger than the threat of death by Dragonfire. So this prompts them to have to use some underhand tactics in winning over the Brackens, which in turn leads to the people in the Riverlands coming to question Daemon and his lack of respect for their various traditions. So there's no doubt that this will come to play later on in the series, because we can already see them building up towards that friction between Daemon and the people of the Riverlands. So definitely this is something to keep an eye on for future repercussions. And just like clockwork, we see Daemon having a vision later on in the episode, which in my opinion has to be one of the most disturbing visions he has had thus far, because we see him getting intimate with a woman that we hadn't really been introduced to before, which turns out to be his mother. So there's really a lot to unpack in this particular vision, as it seems that he's also harboring some deep-seated mommy issues. But at least he finally lays his cards on the table by revealing his true intentions, which involve him usurping the throne for himself. So I know that a lot of Daemon fans won't like this aspect, but I really feel that it kind of tracks with the character, because from the beginning, from that very first season when he was introduced, they introduced him through that potential conflict between him and Rhaenyra, the fact that he was passed in the line of succession. So it only makes sense for him to still harbor those desires to be king. those desires to get what was taken away from him. So whether or not his plan to rule side by side with Rhaenyra will pan out remains to be seen, but this is definitely something that I'm anxious to see how it eventually plays out. Then over at Dragonstone, we once again have Rhaenyra being undermined by the members of her council, as they are pretty much eager to do something more concrete in this ongoing war, because the Greens more or less just dealt them a very heavy blow that led to a very heavy loss, and the retaliation is not forthcoming the way they expect. So Rhaenyra is once again feeling the pressure, and she's forced to seek the counsel of Mysaria, who gives her some very sage advice about leveraging the power of the people, the fact that the people at King's Landing are going through a lot of turmoil at the moment, and because of that vulnerable state, they were in a position to be won over to her side. So Mysaria more or less hatches some plans to try and win them over, and it remains to be seen how these plans will exactly pan out, but this is another thing to keep an eye on. Then in an attempt to patch things up with Daemon, Rhaenyra sends Sir Alfred to go and check on him and just to see the status of the troops he's supposed to be gathering, because there's no doubt that his absence has really left a very huge vacuum in her forces and the way she's perceived by all the other men around her. She also extends the position of hand to Lord Corlys, but he more or less sees it as a feeble gesture, just trying to assuage him after losing his wife. But we see him later on kind of considering whether to take the position or not, because in a way, this is the only thing left for him to do to try and get any kind of justice for what happened to Rhaenys. And then the episode ends with Jace and Rhaenyra deciding to scour all the various records of the Targaryen bloodline in a bid to find new dragon riders for the riderless dragons in their camp. So looking at this episode as a whole, obviously it is clear that after the highs of the battle and all the losses that were suffered, we needed this downtime to really process a lot of the things that happened there. So this episode sheds light on the motivations of the various characters. Like now, we now have Daemon laying all his cards on the table, making it clear that he still has that ambition to be king. Likewise, we have Aemond also making his play for power, with him also ascending to the position of regent. So in a way, the episode was all about that juxtaposition between the two sides, as well as showing the fact that this ongoing conflict has resulted in massive losses for both sides. And at the end of the day, it can only ever end in one way, which is mutually assured destruction. Then looking at the preview for the next episode, it is clear that Jace and Rhaenyra will be following through on their quest for new dragon riders, and we also get a lot of setup for the potential confrontation between Daemon and Aemond, as well as hints of further friction between Rhaenyra and Daemon. So the hope is that they'll be able to set aside their differences and bring together their combined forces. But it is too early to tell if this will have any impact on shifting the current power dynamic. Anyway, these are just my thoughts about the 5th episode of season 2 of House of the Dragon. What did you think about the episode? Were you surprised to see both Daemon and Aemond make power plays, or was this more or less in line with your expectations? Let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed watching this discussion, and to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more discussions like this in the future. And until the next one, this is Michael, signing off.